On the outskirts of Seattle, late in the evening, the supermarket was nearly empty. The lights reflected off polished tile floors, and the air carried the scent of fresh bread and cleaning supplies. In the bakery aisle, near the almond croissants, a woman in a dark navy cashmere coat stood silently, studying the price tags. Rachel Moore, CEO of a major tech company, had left the city and her business behind for a while, hoping to escape the chaos. Her fingers brushed against the glass display, but her eyes were focused past her own reflection, somewhere deeper. "Excuse me, ma'am." A small voice startled her. She turned. Standing before her was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, thin, with braids and an old pink puffer jacket. "I don't have a mom," the girl whispered. "Can I be with you?" Rachel didn't quite grasp what had just happened. The girl stood calmly, asking for nothing. Her eyes were serious, not childlike. Rachel was about to ask where her parents were when she noticed a man a few feet away, standing near a shelf of canned goods. He held a can of soup in one hand, tired, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes. He didn't hurry. He simply waited. Rachel looked back at the girl, trying to think of something sensible, polite to say. But the girl stepped closer, reached out a small hand and softly added, "You smell like my mom used to." Something clicked inside Rachel. Not a jolt, more like a long-closed door quietly opening. The girl placed her hand in Rachel's palm, and that simple, unguarded gesture changed the course of the evening. Rachel glanced toward the man. He gave a silent nod. No explanation, no request, just gratitude, warm, weary. "Shall we walk through the store together?" Rachel asked finally. The girl squeezed her hand a little tighter and nodded. They walked the aisle slowly, the child's hand still curled around Rachel's. It was a small, tentative grip, but firm in its quiet hope. Rachel wasn't sure what she was doing. She didn't usually talk to strangers. She definitely didn't let 6-year-olds hold her hand. And yet, here they were, picking through cans of soup like it was the most natural thing in the world. Behind them, Ben pushed a near-empty cart. He didn't say much, just watched, careful, steady. When Rachel glanced back, their eyes met briefly. He gave her the kind of nod people give in hospitals and small-town diners, a wordless thank you that meant more than it sounded. "I'm Rachel," she said softly as they passed the spice section. Ellie looked up at her, eyes serious. "I'm Ellie. I'm 6 3/4. 3/4. Rachel smiled. "That's practically 7. The girl gave a proud little nod. "I can tie my shoes and make toast. Ben says that's basically adult." Rachel laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "Sounds about right." They passed a shelf stacked with tins of hot chocolate. Ellie stopped, eyeing one with a bright red label and a picture of tiny marshmallows. She turned to Rachel, holding it out like an offering. Rachel looked at Ben. He hesitated, then gave a small shrug. Not quite permission, not quite protest. Something in between. Rachel took the tin and placed it gently in the cart. "Let's get it." Ellie's whole face lit up. They picked up a few more things. Clementines, because Ellie loved peeling them herself. A small pack of ginger cookies. Eggs, bread, a carton of milk. Ben added a can of soup, glancing at prices with the reflex of someone who always calculated first. At the register, Rachel reached for her card before Ben could say anything. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off with a quiet look. "It's fine," she said. He paused, then simply nodded. Outside, the night air was sharp with winter. The parking lot glistened under the lamplight. Ellie held the grocery bag with both hands, carefully balancing it like it held something sacred. Rachel unlocked her car but didn't move to get in. "I'm staying out by the lake," she said, her voice unsure, like she was still deciding. "Just a rental for a few weeks. There's a fireplace. And cocoa now, if you wanted to stop by. To warm up." Ben glanced down at Ellie. She looked up at him, hopeful. "Can we, Ben? Just for a little?" He looked at Rachel again, weighing something, then nodded once. "All right." Rachel opened the back door for Ellie and helped her climb in. The girl settled into the seat like it was a spaceship. She hugged the bag of groceries to her chest. As Rachel started the car, the radio came on, soft, some old holiday tune half familiar in the background. She turned it down, the silence between them gentle, not awkward. Ben rode up front, his hands clasped in his lap. He didn't ask questions, didn't explain, and somehow that was a relief. When they pulled onto the highway, snow began to fall, soft, hesitant flakes against the windshield. In the back seat, Ellie whispered, "It smells like my mom used to in here." Rachel glanced at her in the mirror. "What smell is that?" Ellie thought for a second. "Like trees, and tea, and a little bit of books." Rachel blinked, surprised by the detail. Ben looked out the window, saying nothing. The drive took 20 minutes. The lake house stood quiet and low near the shore, porch lights casting long shadows over the frozen ground. Inside it was warm, still, the kind of stillness that felt earned. Rachel unlocked the door, stepped aside. "Come in." Ellie ran ahead, her boots thudding gently on the hardwood floor. "You have a fireplace," she exclaimed, as if it was treasure. Rachel set the groceries down. "You want to help me bake cookies?" Ellie turned with wide eyes. "Now?" Rachel smiled. "Now seems like a good time." Ben hesitated by the door. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said simply. Ellie helped measure sugar with the intensity of a scientist. Her cheeks flushed pink from the heat. Rachel tied a too-big apron around her, and they laughed when flour dusted her nose. Ben watched from the kitchen table, his posture slowly unwinding. After the cookies baked, they sat on the couch with plates in their laps. A cartoon hummed softly from the TV. Rachel leaned back, mug in hand, and asked, "How did you two meet?" Ellie answered first. "He found me." Rachel looked to Ben. "I run a small boat repair shop," he said quietly. "One morning, 7 years ago, I found a blanket on the dock. Inside was a baby. No note, just her name stitched into the fabric." Ellie leaned against him proudly. "That was me." Rachel's breath caught. "No one ever came?" she asked. Ben shook his head. "I waited, reported it. They called it abandonment. She went into foster care for a while. I kept checking in. Eventually, they let me foster her, and then adopt." His voice didn't waver, but there was something in it, the quiet weight of someone who stayed, long after others left. Rachel nodded. She didn't know what to say. Ellie yawned and curled up on the couch, the cookie still in her hand. Rachel stood, fetched a blanket, and gently laid it over her. Ben watched, his eyes soft. "She hasn't fallen asleep like that in a long time," he said. Rachel didn't answer, but when she sat back down, something inside her had shifted. The next morning, sunlight pooled through the frost-rimmed windows, golden and slow. Rachel stood barefoot in the kitchen, the quiet hum of the kettle rising beside her. Outside, the lake was still, a sheet of frozen silver. She poured hot water into 2 mugs and added cocoa powder, stirring until it swirled smooth. Behind her, footsteps padded gently across the floor. Ben appeared in the doorway, a flannel blanket draped over his shoulders. His hair was mussed, and his voice still thick with sleep. "Smells good. I figured hot chocolate might be tradition now," Rachel said, setting a mug in front of him. He gave her a tired smile. "Ellie's still out?" Rachel nodded. "She slept through the night." Ben cradled the mug between both hands. "She doesn't do that often. Usually wakes up once or twice. Bad dreams sometimes." Rachel hesitated. "I used to too, after everything." Ben looked at her, quiet. She added, "I lost a pregnancy years ago. It wasn't just the loss. It was the knowing I couldn't try again. The doctor said there were complications. Scar tissue. I stopped hoping after that." Her voice didn't break. She spoke like someone describing weather, a fact of life. But her hands trembled as she lifted her own cup. Ben nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the occasional crackle from the wood stove. Then Rachel moved to the small radio on the counter and turned the dial until soft old music filled the room. Something bluesy, quiet, with brass in the background. Ben smiled faintly. "My dad used to play that exact song." On cassette. Rachel leaned against the counter, her voice distant. I used to dance in the kitchen to it. My mom's robe wrapped around me like a cape. Something in her eyes shimmered. She turned away, wiping at the corner of her face. Ben didn't speak. He didn't reach out. He just stayed, bearing witness. Later that day, Ellie woke to the smell of cinnamon and the sound of cartoons. Her hair stuck up on one side, and she rubbed her eyes with her fists. I had a dream, she said groggily. We had a treehouse and a dog named Waffles. Rachel knelt beside her on the rug. Good dream. Ellie nodded solemnly. It felt like a memory, but from the future. Ben chuckled behind them. The hours passed quietly. They built a snowman by the frozen dock and baked a second batch of cookies. Rachel let Ellie paint her nails with sparkly polish from a dusty box she'd found under the bathroom sink. In the evening, they watched old cartoons and fell asleep in a warm pile of blankets and borrowed comfort. For the first time in a long while, Rachel didn't check her email. She didn't think about meetings or deadlines or quarterly projections. She just existed. The following week blurred into a kind of rhythm, simple, unspoken. In the mornings, Ben would make pancakes while Rachel brewed strong coffee. Ellie would draw on napkins and narrate stories about frogs in space or magical sandwiches. In the afternoons, they walked along the frozen lake, bundled in mismatched coats. Ellie would always run ahead, calling back facts she'd learned from library books. Did you know otters hold hands so they don't float away? Or, snow is actually made of six-sided crystals, not just white blobs. Sometimes, when Rachel watched her, she would forget to breathe. One evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, Rachel and Ben sat on the back porch under heavy quilts. The stars blinked sharp in the winter sky. Why boats? She asked. Ben sipped his tea. They're honest. When something's broken, it shows. You fix what's cracked, seal what leaks. And when it floats again, it's like forgiveness. Rachel smiled faintly. I've spent so long trying to patch things you can't see. Reputations, boardrooms, numbers. Ben looked at her. And do you miss it? She thought for a moment. No, but I miss feeling useful. Like what I did mattered. He studied her for a long beat. Maybe it still does, just in different ways. Rachel nodded, eyes distant. That night, as she tucked Ellie in, the girl reached out and brushed her fingers against Rachel's sleeve. Can I call you Mama Rachel? She asked softly. Rachel froze. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Ellie watched her, eyes wide, hopeful. Rachel started, then stopped. Maybe just Rachel for now. Ellie's face fell. Not dramatically, just the slow collapse of a balloon untied. Rachel kissed her forehead gently. Sleep well, starfish. But later that night, Rachel packed a bag. She didn't leave a note. By sunrise, the lake house was quiet again. Ben didn't chase her. He didn't explain anything to Ellie. He just kept showing up, every morning, with warm oatmeal and silly stories about ducks in the snow. And every night, as he tucked her in, Ellie would ask the same question. Is Mama Rachel coming back? And each night, Ben would whisper, maybe soon. The snowstorm came 3 weeks after Rachel left. It arrived like an argument, loud and sudden. Wind howled through the trees, and the lake vanished beneath a thick white curtain. Power flickered once, then went out entirely. Ben lit candles and pulled every blanket in the house onto the living room floor. Ellie was quieter than usual, her cheeks flushed, her hands cold even under layers. She didn't complain. She rarely did. But when she didn't finish her toast and turned her face to the couch with a small whimper, Ben felt the first needle of fear. By late afternoon, her forehead burned. She didn't respond when he called her name the second time. That scared him most. He wrapped her in a coat, tucked a hat over her curls, and carried her out to the truck. The roads were slick, the tires slid on curves. But he didn't care. He drove blind if he had to. The nearest clinic was 30 minutes away on dry roads. Tonight, it took nearly an hour. By the time they arrived, Ellie's skin was damp with fever sweat, her breath shallow. They got her inside, where the lights buzzed overhead and the receptionist wore a thick scarf over her uniform. Power was patchy, supplies thin. While the nurse checked Ellie's vitals, Ben sat with his hands clasped between his knees, head down. He thought about the boat he had almost finished restoring, about the books Ellie hadn't finished reading, about Rachel. He pulled out his phone, stared at her contact. Just a name, no photo, no promise. He typed one word, please. Then he waited. It was after midnight when the door opened. Rachel stepped in wearing her old coat, hair damp from the snow. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just walked straight to the hospital bed and sat beside Ellie. The girl stirred faintly. Rachel brushed the back of her hand over Ellie's cheek. Still warm, she whispered. Ben sat in the corner and watched them, the woman who had left without a word, and the girl who had asked for her every night since. When Ellie finally woke, she blinked up through hazy lashes and smiled faintly. You still smell like my mama. Rachel's eyes filled with quiet tears. I missed you, the girl said. Rachel nodded, her voice catching. I missed you too. She didn't leave again. By the time Ellie's fever broke, the storm had passed. Sunlight cracked across the sky in golden slices, the world outside glittering with ice. Rachel made soup in the small kitchen. Ben sat by the window, rubbing warmth back into his hands. Ellie slept between them at night now, curled like a comma. Sometimes, Rachel would wake before dawn, unable to sleep. She'd walk the edge of the lake, breath fogging the frozen air, heart beating somewhere between fear and relief. Ben would sometimes join her, wordless. Once, as they walked in silence, he said, I thought you weren't coming back. Rachel didn't answer right away. She looked at the lake. I thought I wasn't either, she finally said. I was afraid. Of what? Of wanting more than I was allowed to. Ben nodded slowly, like he understood something she didn't want to say out loud. Later that morning, Ellie asked to go outside. I want to see if the snowman melted yet, she said, tugging at her mittens. Rachel helped her bundle up. Ben watched them from the porch. Something in his chest eased, not fully, but enough to exhale. That night, Ellie built a pillow fort in the living room and declared it their new castle. Rachel brought cocoa in mismatched mugs. Ben added a flashlight for stars. Under the blanket roof, Ellie whispered, If we're a family now, does that mean we get to stay like this? Rachel looked at Ben, then at Ellie. We'll stay as long as you need, she said softly. Ben didn't correct her, and for the first time Rachel believed it. Spring came slow. The lake thawed in layers. Birds returned in sudden flocks. The town awakened from its frozen quiet. Rachel didn't return to the city. She filed her resignation from the company with a letter that was shorter than expected. No fanfare, just truth. She bought boots, dug a small garden, learned to patch drywall. Ellie started school in town. On her first day, she told the teacher, I don't have just one mom. I have a whole home now. That evening, they celebrated with pancakes and raspberry jam. Rachel framed Ellie's first spelling test. Ben built her a desk from old pine boards. They laughed more. They argued sometimes. Rachel learned to ask for help. Ben learned to let her. And in that quiet rhythm of living, of burning toast, forgotten groceries, sleepy goodnights, they found something close to joy. On Christmas Eve, the lake was still again. Snow settled soft on the roof. Ben lit a fire. Rachel placed a small wooden box on the table and handed it to him. Inside was a photograph of the three of them, laughing on the dock. It's the only one we're all in, she said. Ben looked at her, then reached into his coat and pulled out something small. It was a ring, carved from an old boat plank, sanded smooth. You weren't the miracle I prayed for, he said quietly. You're the one I didn't know I needed. Rachel didn't answer. She just leaned into his shoulder, her hand closing gently around his. In the next room, Ellie was asleep beneath a blanket she had stitched herself, her name embroidered in green thread at the edge. Outside, snow began to fall again. Inside, they stayed warm, and the quiet wasn't loneliness anymore. It was home. The lake was still, coated in soft ice, The sky stretched wide and quiet above it. Inside the house, warmth pooled from the fireplace, filling the rooms with the scent of pine and old ash. Ellie sat at the table, tongue between her teeth as she focused on coloring a spaceship. Rachel stirred a pot on the stove, humming faintly to herself. Ben watched them from the doorway, hands in his pockets, smiling. Rachel leaned over Ellie's drawing, pointing gently. "That looks like a good moon." "It's a secret base," Ellie said proudly. "Ah," Rachel nodded. "Even better." Ellie looked up suddenly, her eyes bright. "Can I ask something?" she said. Rachel turned. "Of course." The girl hesitated, then quietly, with the weight of something long considered, said, "Can I call you Mama Rachel now?" The room fell still. The only sound was the quiet bubbling of the pot on the stove. Rachel froze. Ellie waited, hopeful. Ben stood perfectly still. "And Rachel?" She smiled just faintly, but something behind her eyes flickered, like a match going out. "That's sweet, sweetheart," she said carefully. "But I think maybe we should wait a bit." Ellie's smile dimmed. Not all the way, just the way a candle dims when a door closes nearby. Rachel turned back to the stove. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Rachel stood by the window, watching snow fall into the dark lake. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her sweater tighter. Ben came in behind her. "She's asleep?" he asked. Rachel nodded. Ben watched her for a long moment. "I've been afraid to say it," she said suddenly. "But I don't know what this is supposed to be. I'm not her mother. I came here to disappear. And now," Ben stayed silent. "She deserves someone permanent," Rachel whispered. He finally spoke. "She didn't ask for perfect. She asked for you." Rachel's face crumpled. Not visibly, not loudly. Just something quiet folding inward. That night, after Ben went to bed, she packed her things. No note, no goodbye. By sunrise, she was gone. Ellie noticed by breakfast. She stood by the empty guest room doorway, silent. "Where's Mama Rachel?" she asked. Ben crouched down, met her eyes. "She had to go," he said gently. The girl's lower lip trembled. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. "You didn't." She was quiet for a moment, nestled into his chest. Then, in a voice so small it barely reached him, "Is she coming back?" Ben didn't lie. "I don't know." Ellie nodded against his shirt. That night, Ben tucked her in like always. She looked up at him. "Is Mama Rachel coming?" He smoothed her hair. "Maybe." Every night after, she asked the same question. And every night, Ben gave the same answer. Maybe. He kept the house clean, kept the cocoa warm, kept the blankets folded. He didn't try to replace Rachel. He just stayed. And Ellie, she didn't cry. Not often. Just watched the window when it snowed. Drew pictures of boats and stars. And asked softly every night, "Is Mama Rachel coming?" The snowstorm came heavy and fast, like the sky was emptying all at once. By the time the first tree cracked under the weight of ice, Ben had already lit every candle in the house and moved Ellie's blanket nest closer to the fireplace. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her cheeks were flushed, her hands too warm. She didn't speak much, just lay curled under layers, her breath shallow and uneven. Ben sat beside her, rubbing her back in slow circles, counting the seconds between each soft exhale. Outside, the wind screamed against the windows. He touched her forehead again, hotter. He stood, paced, tried the power, still out. No signal. The roads were a mess, but she was getting worse. At 2 a.m., with snow waist-high and still falling, he pulled the old truck out of the shed. Blankets in the back seat, flashlight, thermos, salt for the tires, and Ellie, bundled in his coat, barely responsive. The drive to the clinic was a blur, headlights carving tunnels through white. The tires skidded more than once. He gripped the wheel like it might slip from his hands. At the clinic, the nurse took one look at Ellie and called for help. Small rural staff, a single doctor on rotation, backup generator humming. Ben stood in the corner of the exam room, wet to the knees, his heart cracking at the sound of Ellie's labored breathing. He held her hand even as they checked her pulse, her lungs, her eyes. Dehydrated. High fever. We'll monitor overnight, the doctor said. Ben nodded, but he didn't really hear it. He sat down, and for the first time since Rachel left, he pulled out his phone. He hadn't erased her number, just stared at it sometimes, like a prayer with no answer. Now his thumbs moved without thinking. She's sick. I don't know what else to do. Please. He hit send. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Then more. The nurse returned with a blanket. He didn't see her. He just watched Ellie's tiny hand curl slightly, her lips dry. Then the door opened, and there she was, Rachel, coat dusted with snow, hair damp around her face, eyes wide and searching. She didn't say anything, just crossed the room and sat beside the hospital bed, taking Ellie's hand in both of hers. Ben rose slightly, uncertain, but she didn't look at him, only at the child. Ellie's breath rasped once, then again. Her head shifted slightly toward the new warmth. Rachel didn't speak, didn't cry. She just stayed. Minutes passed, then an hour, then another. Rachel didn't move. Sometime near dawn, Ellie stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. She blinked slowly, confused. Then, with a faint breath, she whispered, "You still smell like my mama." Rachel lowered her head, eyes wet. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm here now." Ben turned away, jaw clenched, not from hurt, but from something he hadn't let himself feel in weeks. Relief. Ellie's fever broke that evening. Rachel sat beside her still, her coat folded over the hospital chair. She read softly from Ellie's favorite picture book, voice barely above a breath. Ben brought coffee. Rachel didn't touch it. They didn't speak much, but when they did, it wasn't sharp. It was tired, honest. "I shouldn't have left the way I did," Rachel said quietly, staring at the drip. Ben nodded once. "I knew why you did." Rachel turned. "You didn't try to stop me." "No," he said. "But I didn't stop waiting either." Rachel's hand trembled as she brushed Ellie's curls off her forehead. "I was scared," she whispered. Ben looked at her gently. So was she. Silence settled again, but softer this time. They drove home 2 days later. Ellie sat in the back seat, small but brighter, wrapped in her blanket, watching the snow-laced trees blur by. Ben drove. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap. She looked out the window, then at the dashboard, then finally at him. "I'm not going back," she said. "To the city. To the company." Ben didn't react. Then he smiled. "I didn't think you would." She smiled too, faint and slow. "I don't know what I am now," she said. "You're hers," Ben said quietly. "And maybe that's enough." Back at the lake house, everything looked the same. Blankets still folded. The wooden boat untouched. Rachel made cocoa that night. Ellie sat at the table, humming. Ben watched them, leaning against the doorframe. And when Rachel set the mug in front of Ellie, she smiled. "I'm glad you came back," the girl said. Rachel touched her shoulder. "I'm not leaving again." In the quiet of that winter night, something shifted. Not loud, not sharp, just a slow click, like a lock opening from inside. Rachel stayed. Not because of guilt, not because of need, but because she wanted to, because something inside her had finally stopped running. Because love, the kind that matters, stays when it's asked and stays when it's not. It just stays. A year passed. The lake thawed early that spring, and by June, the dock was scattered with small sandals, damp towels, and watercolor paintings left out to dry. Laughter drifted from the kitchen window, soft, everyday music. Rachel stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, soap clinging to her arms. Through the window, she could see Ellie running across the yard, chasing nothing in particular, her hair wild in the wind. Ben entered behind her, holding a letter. "It's from the state," he said. "The foundation's officially approved." Rachel turned, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Really?" He nodded. They stood there for a moment, the hum of the fridge between them. "We'll need office space," she said. "We have a boathouse," he offered. She laughed. "You'd turn anything into a project." He stepped closer, brushing flour from her cheek. "You already did." Later that week, they opened their first family support meeting in the town library. 3 people came. Rachel brought cookies. Ben brought extra folding chairs just in case. They didn't need them, but no one left early either. Ellie sat in the corner, reading to a toddler whose mom hadn't had a moment to herself in days. When the meeting ended, Rachel looked at Ben and whispered, "This is enough." He nodded. "More than." On Christmas Eve, snow fell gently across the lake, softening the roof and filling the trees with silence. Inside, the house glowed with yellow light and the scent of baked apples. Ellie hung a paper star on the window, her handwriting crooked across the middle. "Home." Ben called from the living room. "Come here, both of you." Rachel entered, wiping her hands on her sweater. Ellie followed, carrying a cup of cocoa. Ben stood near the fire, holding something small in his palm. A wooden ring, carved smooth, warm in color. He didn't kneel. He just looked at her. "You weren't the miracle I prayed for," he said. "You're the one I didn't know I needed." Rachel didn't speak. She didn't need to. She took the ring, slid it on. It fit. That night, long after Ellie had fallen asleep between them with cinnamon on her breath, Rachel whispered into the dark, "I thought I'd lost everything." Ben's hand found hers under the blanket. "And," Rachel smiled into the quiet, "I was just waiting to find something real." And outside, the snow kept falling. Not an ending. A beginning, quiet, true, and whole.